50 years of friendship ended in one night. One man got rich, the other begged for bread. Years later, the wrong victim came back. In the smog-choked streets of industrial Birmingham, the air is thick with coal dust and the rhythmic clanging of hammers as Arthur and Thomas sit in their usual corner of the tavern. They share a single plate of bread and a pint of bitter, their weathered faces etched with the lines of 50 years of shared history and hard labor. Arthur counts the meager coins from his weekly pay, glancing at Thomas with a smile of absolute, unspoken trust that has survived wars and poverty alike. They speak of their retirement, a quiet cottage away from the soot, their hands rough and scarred from the factories they have served since they were boys. The candlelight flickers against the heavy iron stove, casting long shadows that seem to bind them together in a world that usually discards the old. Thomas leans in, his eyes bright with a sudden sharp ambition that Arthur has never seen before. Arthur, why settle for a cottage when we can own the very machines we've bled for? He promises a legacy, a factory of their own, built from every single shilling they've ever saved. The decision is made under the dim yellow light of Thomas's kitchen table, where they empty their life savings, lifelong dreams converted into a stack of thin paper notes. Thomas, the one with the technical mind, maps out the venture with a precision that leaves Arthur in awe of his friend's genius. They sign the partnership papers with trembling hands, a pact sealed not by lawyers, but a brotherhood that began in the mud of the Great War. Every penny Arthur had kept for his old age is handed over, a total blind leap of faith into a future Thomas has carefully painted for him. Thomas takes the lead on the logistics, while Arthur handles the physical labor, both men pouring their final reserves of energy into the brick and mortar of their dream. The machines finally roar to life, a symphony of progress that fills the new factory walls and Arthur's heart with a pride he's never known. Orders pour in from across the country, and for a few glorious months, they are the kings of their own domain. They walk the factory floor together, Thomas checking the ledgers, while Arthur adjusts the looms, their success appearing as solid and unbreakable as the iron girders above them. Thomas buys a new tailored coat, while Arthur simply enjoys the feeling of a full stomach and the security of a future finally won. They toast to their triumph as the sun sets over the Birmingham skyline, unaware that the architect of their success is already designing their ruin. The disaster strikes at midnight, a sudden, violent explosion of heat that turns the night sky into a terrifying shade of orange. Arthur runs through the streets in his nightshirt, his lungs screaming as he reaches the gates to find his life's work engulfed in a wall of flame. The heat is so intense it melts the very looms he spent weeks installing, and he can only watch, paralyzed, as his entire future collapses into a pile of charred wood and twisted metal. Thomas arrives late, falling to his knees, weeping with a theatrical intensity that masks his cold, calculating eyes. The fire captain pulls Arthur aside the next morning, pointing to the strange purple chemical residue on the floorboards, proof that the fire was no accident. Arthur stares at the ruins, the realization that someone wanted them dead or broke chilling him more than the cold morning air. Thomas stands amidst the embers, his face a mask of grief, already mentally calculating the distance to the next city. A few days later, Thomas tells Arthur that the grief is too much, that the sight of the city is like a knife in his heart. He packs his bags and leaves for a distant city to start over as a laborer, leaving Arthur alone in the wreckage with nothing but a shattered watch and no savings. Arthur is forced back into the slums, working double shifts at the docks just to afford a crust of bread and a damp room. He becomes a shadow of the man he was, his hair turning white, his spirit breaking under the weight of his sudden, unexplained poverty. He often stares at the empty factory plot, wondering what kind of monster could have burned a dream so beautiful. Years pass before a job at a shipping yard takes Arthur to a wealthy coastal city he has never visited. While walking past a row of grand Victorian mansions, he stops dead in his tracks at the sight of a familiar figure stepping out of a luxury carriage. It is Thomas, dressed in silk and gold, looking younger and more powerful than he ever did in Birmingham. Arthur follows him from a distance, watching as Thomas enters a massive, thriving textile mill that bears his name in polished brass. Arthur feels a cold, sinking realization in his gut, his legs barely carrying him as he seeks out a local worker to ask about the great man. He meets a disgruntled foreman in a back-alley pub who tells him the story of the genius who arrived years ago with a massive insurance payout and a warehouse full of rescued stock.
Arthur listens as the foreman describes how Thomas had moved his real machinery out weeks before the fire, replacing it with scrap and lighting the fuse himself. The betrayal hits Arthur like a physical blow. 50 years of friendship revealed to be nothing more than a long-term investment for a predator. He realizes that the man he loved like a brother had planned his poverty, had watched him cry in the embers of the factory while holding the insurance papers in his pocket. Arthur sits on a cold stone bench, looking at his shaking, empty hands. And for the first time in his life, the kindness in his eyes is replaced by a hard, freezing steel. He doesn't go to the police. He knows the law is a tool for men like Thomas, and he decides that a betrayal this deep requires a much more personal kind of justice. Arthur spends weeks observing the new factory, learning the schedules, the ventilation, and the way Thomas has cut corners to maximize his greed. He realizes that Thomas has insured this new empire for 3 times its value, hoping for one final accident before he retires to the countryside. Arthur's plan is simple. He will give Thomas the fire he wants, but he will take the insurance and the escape away first. He works in the shadows, sabotaging the very safety systems Thomas neglected and documenting the fraud Thomas was preparing to commit.
He creates a trap that will leave Thomas standing in the middle of a burning building with no way to claim a single penny. On the final night, Arthur waits in the shadows of Thomas's office as the first lick of flame, this time real and uncontrolled, begins to spread. Thomas enters, panicked, trying to save his ledgers, only to find Arthur sitting in his chair, holding the original, charred partnership agreement from Birmingham. The shock on Thomas's face is a masterpiece of terror as Arthur tells him that the insurance investigators have already received the proof of his previous crimes. "I didn't come for the money, Thomas. I came to watch you become exactly what you made me." Arthur walks out of the side exit as the alarms begin to scream, leaving Thomas to watch his empire turn to ash, this time without a payout and no escape. Arthur walks away into the night, the weight finally lifted from his shoulders, the debt of a lifetime paid in full by the light of the burning lies.